Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat class, Shabbat Shofetim. This is also the fourth week of what's called Shava'ad Hamtah, the seventh haftarot of comfort and consolation that we read from the prophets in between Sha'B'Ab and Rosh Hashanah. And that means that we're closer to Rosh Hashanah than we are to Sha'B'Ab. Good news. Question of the day is, does Hashem expect perfection from us? Seems like a question with an easy answer. And yet we're confronted with a pasuk embedded in the middle of the parasha that seems to imply otherwise. The pasuk is located in Perek Yud Het, pasuk Yud Gimal. And it says as follows, Tamim tihiyeh im Adonai Elohecha. Be tamim with God. What does the word tamim mean? It seems like a charge. It seems certainly like a directive which obligates us to do something. In fact, there's a dispute among our commentators and our poskim whether in fact this is a mizvat aseh, a positive commandment from the Torah, or is it more like a guidance gesture, a bit of advice and direction by the Torah Kedusha. Now, let's just look back in our inventory of memory and experiences and try to wrap our heads around this terminology, tamim, around this root word. It seems very enigmatic. What does tamim mean? If we reflect to the Seder, when we have the Arba'a Banim, we have the Hakam, the Rasha, and then we get to Tam. Tam, you look in your average Haggadah, English translation, think about how you've explained it to your children and grandchildren. Usually it means simple, basic, the basic, simple person. Tam, basic guy. On the other hand, we know, we read in the book of Bimidbar, in Perashat Chukat, that we have an obligation to bring the red heifer, the Para Aduma, and it's to be burnt. Its ashes combined with water will purify those who have contracted impurity, tum'ah, from the deceased. And we're commanded in describing that red heifer, that Para Aduma, that it has to be temimah. You have that root word, tamim. And there it means, in fact, perfect. It should be unblemished in many ways, in terms of its body, in terms of its hair, in terms of its lack of work activity. Tamim there means perfect. So it seems like we have almost opposite ends of the spectrum where we're familiar with a root word that means simple and another that means a person's pure perfection. And it's Torah is actually commanding us one. Standard, raise the bar to on one hand, we have Rashi. Rashi explains this pasuk tamim to be contextual within context of the parasha prior to the pasuk, the team leading up. Was again is what law says. Now, commandments, prohibitions. A person cannot engage in kosem, kesamim, me'onen, menahesh, mechashef, chober haber, Shu'el Ob v'yide'oni doresh el hametim, without going to all the specifics. In general, those are referring to individuals and activities that have to do with sorcery, witchcraft, fortune telling, superstition, communicating with the deceased, and all types of practices of telling the future and tapping into different signs in the world. These are practices that were perhaps more popular in a certain day and age, were real and existed and perhaps in some places still exists today in this world. The Torah, each one of them is mizvat lo ta'aseh, is a prohibition. Don't engage in them. Ki to'abat Hashem, because they're all abominable, says the Torah. Following the Torah then commands, tamim tihiya imad Adonai Elohecha. Rather, in other words, it seems the word tamim here is in contradistinction to all those superstitious fortune-telling witchcraft practices. Rather be tamim. And Rashi explains that indeed, go with Hashem bitmimut. Simply, perhaps, tesapelo, wait for God, anticipate what he does. Don't try to find futuristic things on your own. Whatever comes upon you, says Rashi, kabel bitmimut. Accept, and I'll use this word, I'll sort of help Rashi with the English, accept innocently. In other words, according to Rashi, the command here, the charge here is have, you can say maybe, perfect trust in God. Accept him. Don't try to tap in to all other various types of practices in order to know what God's going to do, understand what's going on in the world. Have a trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What befalls upon you, you know is coming from him. And that is a very, you can say, more simple approach to the word tamim. And indeed, the Rambam, who does not count this as a mizvat aseh, as a positive commandment, it's rather a, as we said, a flip side, a converse guidance to all the negative commandments, the prohibitions. He says all these things are divrei kazav v'sheker. These are all falsehood. Why are we pursuing them? He says, Baalei chokhmat mimedat, people of knowledge and understanding and faith. He says, no, that is not complete knowledge. We know from proofs that these are not considered to be chokhmah, rather they're hevel, they're nonsense, they're frivolous types of pursuits. And that's why the Torah told you that this is an appropriate behavior. This is not something that we should pursue, rather, tamim tihiyeh im Hashem. So there you go. Maybe not exactly the tam person, the simple guy on a seder table, but certainly a simplicity in the respect of innocence and trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Wait to see what he does with your life. Don't try to find ways to discover what was not meant for you to discover. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the Ramban. And the Ramban taps into, you can say, a higher expectation of emunah, of faith that we could have in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Perfect? At least getting there. The Rambam basically tells us that this is a charge. This is an expectation. It's mizvat aseh. It's a positive commandment that we have to fulfill with our faith. Tamim tihiyeh. And others, along with the Rambam, explain that this could be looked at in a historical context. And that a person, says the Ramban, should have the type of faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is perfect in that we subjugate ourselves to God completely, and that we understand and that we know that he is the absolute orchestrator of all events, and that be they personal events, national events, events of a worldly orientation, they're controlled by the creator of the world. He's absolutely responsible for everything. And we have to subject ourselves to such faith. Tamim tihiyeh. Maybe not perfection, but certainly bordering on the perfection. Certainly holding the bar very high for us in our faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And says that Ramban, if you really, really need to know the future, that's why I appoint the prophets. There are Nevi'im, or at least there were, that when God deemed it appropriate, informed us of future events, because they perhaps would aid and help us. And we can tap in, of course, to prophets of century old, who predicted their future, which is our current and our future. And those are there to help us in our perfect faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in understanding and accepting that God, in fact, is the orchestrator of all events, and believing in him perfectly without any other exterior aids. So, on one hand, you have the word tamim being looked at as simple and innocent. And on the other hand, looked at as a higher order of faith, bordering on perfection. Are both commands, is this perhaps a dispute? Is there some type of tug of war going on in our mind as to where the Torah is stretching us? Can we bridge this gap? And I believe we can. And perhaps mold this into one single command. And to that, we look to who was given this charge for the first time. We know that Noah was called Ish Tamim, but Abraham Abinu was charged by HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Sefer Bereshit, in Perashat Lech Lecha, prior to the command of the Brit Milah, Hithalech lefanai v'yeh tamim, v'yeh tamim. Go before me and be tamim. And right before that, God identified himself to Moshe Rabbeinu, Ani El Shaddai. I am the God, Shaddai, it's one of the names of God. And we know, we can relate to that term later in history, in Parashat Va'era, when Hashem was, so to speak, rebuking Moshe Rabbeinu, when he impulsively, in his first attempt to go to Paro, said, hey, this is not working. And God said, this is not working? 1 second. Va'era, he told Moshe Rabbeinu, I appear to Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Be'el Shaddai, in the name of Shaddai, Ushmi Hashem, my name Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, I didn't inform them of. What did that mean there in that context? It meant very simply, he was telling Moshe Rabbeinu, stop expecting immediate results. It's not the way it works. Patience. Think of the Avot for a moment. Think of Abraham Abinu. He has promised this land is yours. Your offspring will inherit the land. This will be the place of your descendants forever. Walk it, tour around it, sojourn, and enjoy. But right now, it's not yours. Abraham, along with his son and grandson, Abraham and Ishaq and Yaakov, were asked to dwell in a land that was promised to them and yet never receive it in their lifetimes. God made them guarantee that were not going to be fulfilled, not later in their lives, but till after they left this earth, alit ba'olam hazeh. And yet they were told to trust. God told Abraham Abinu, Hithalech lefanai, go before me, keep my commands. Do what you have to do, and I'll do what I have to do. Hiyeh tamim. Trust that everything will work out. Trust that everything that you see is in my master plan. Don't question my methodology. Don't question my approach. And this was the exact rebuke that God gave Moshe Rabbeinu early in his career as a prophet. Don't expect immediate gratification and results. Know that everything you see right now is precisely the way I planned it to be. I know what I'm doing. As I say in the modern day terminology, I got this, says God. And indeed, the Avot trusted in a perfect trust, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On one hand, it was innocent. On one hand, it was a trust, it was a perfect trust, where they understood that God's got this. I don't question the events around me, despite the fact that they don't seem to be coming together. I can't connect the dots. And on the other hand, it's a higher order emunah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu indeed orchestrates and manipulates the circumstances around us in this world, in this master plan, in this beautiful portrait in which he synthesizes every single event in this world to a beautiful picture that all comes together. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has this, and we are asked to elevate our faith in a manner that we subjugate ourselves to everything that he does, even that which doesn't seem to come together and fit into what we expect. So often we become frustrated in our personal predicaments. We don't understand the events that are unfolding. We're not satisfied. We imagine something else that waits for us around the corner because we have a plan, because we understand, or we think we understand, what needs to happen in our lives. We anticipate some better set of circumstances in our lives. And listen, of course, we have free will, and there are many aspects of our existence that we control and we're expected to constantly improve. And of course, first and foremost, our own self-improvement. But then there are even more which we do not. Be tamim, Hashem commands us. Stop waiting for things to change. Stop making our personal satisfaction conditional on other events that will come. Trust me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells not just our avot and not just rebukes Moshe Rabbeinu, but tells us for all eternity, you do your part and I'll do mine. I'm very good at my part. I've been doing it for a while and I've been doing it well. Everything in your life is going just fine, according to plan, according to my plan. I planned it this way. Keep you doing your best, do your best, and believe that all else that occurs is part of this perfect picture that I've painted for you, a picture that will, even in your eyes, look and be perfect when it's all done. I'm working on it. Trust me. Believe with perfect faith that this entire ride that we call life is being steered by me, your maker and your creator, intended for our best interests. So trust HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Tamim Tihiyeh, because indeed, he's got this. Shabbat Shalom.
Rabbi.